So time for self-analysis. What kind of person are you? Let me give you some specifics. Are you a highly scheduled person? You know, somebody who plans your day or plans your life and then you work your plan. You don't let anything distract you from that. You just work it. Or maybe you're a little bit more like me, where you kind of live life as it happens. Some people are so highly scheduled that if somebody stops them to do a survey in the street, they say, no, I got to schedule you in. Are you that way? If I wanted to come see you, would I have to book an appointment with you to come talk to you? I grew up in a culture that you just drop by. And I've realized that in our North American culture, particularly in Metro Vancouver, people don't really appreciate when you just kind of drop by. They think they start getting concerned about what the house looks like, and think, no, I came to see you. You know, I don't really care what your house looks like. But maybe you need a little bit more schedule than you really do. You know, somebody like this, where, you know, you sleep, you wake up exhausted, and you say, I think I need to go to bed earlier tomorrow night, or tonight. And you're sleepy all day, and you finally wake up a little later. Now you're wide awake. And then you kind of like goes by, and you're so wide awake, it's like, who cares? So might as well stay up late. And all of a sudden it's 2 a.m., and you think, maybe I should probably go to bed. I often don't turn my lights out until about midnight, 1 o'clock, and I'm up at about 6 every morning. And then you get towards lunchtime, and this is you looking forward to waiting for lunch. Is that you? My motto for life is, if life is what happens while you're planning to do something else, or you're making other plans. By the way, if you're married here and you're a highly scheduled kind of person, you're probably married to somebody like me. Diana, bless her heart, you know, is very time conscious. She grew up in a very strong German Mennonite culture that, you know, certain times are certain times, and then she married me, and it's like, we show up when we do. Life happens, you know, and you live life as you go along. You don't plan a whole lot of things. My idea, by the way, of a mission trip, not to scare you off from coming with us to Casa Luz. I hope you plan. We need to get that. So if you're thinking about it, time to stop thinking about it and make a commitment. My general idea about mission trips is just get me there, and I'll figure what we do when we get there. We'll be better planned this time around than that, but that's the way it goes. So this whole thing about time, and we're such a time-conscious society, leads to another question, which is, what is time anyway? Time is something that governs our lives. We go about it in every day, but when it comes to trying to define it, it turns out it's not quite as simple as it may sound. So there's different ways of looking at time. There's a very practical way, and that's the way most of us think about time. We have schedules, or we at least have sort of some semblance of schedule, and we think of time as, you know, hours and minutes and days and weeks and years, and it's something that we can measure. But then there's a cultural perspective. Now, I don't know about your culture a whole lot, although I see, you know, punctuality is not necessarily a highlight sometimes. I'm not being critical, I'm making an observation. But I grew up in a culture that punctuality was not terribly high on their list of priorities either. I grew up in a Latin America in Ecuador. My culture growing up was more Latino than Canadian. My dad, who was a missionary there for 40-some years, he became Ecuadorian in every aspect of his life except time. He had radio work. They all thought he was native because he spoke Spanish so well. But my dad never seemed to shake the idea that you could set your clocks by him. 7 o'clock was breakfast. And if you wanted to eat breakfast, you sat down at the table at 7 o'clock. 12 noon was lunch. And if you wanted to eat lunch, you sat down at 12 noon. Supper was at 5:30. 5:30. By 5:35, 5:45, if you weren't there, It was tough. Sucks to be you. You know, you're tough. You don't get to eat. We arrived. My dad had the idea that if you weren't someplace 15 minutes early, you're already late. That does not fly in Latin American culture, where if church starts at 9:30 and you get there at 9:15, the doors probably aren't going to open until 9:45. So we would sit out in the car for half an hour and say, Dad, why are we here? So there's a cultural aspect, and every culture has their different concepts of time. There's a philosophical aspect of time. You know, they debate, is time circular, is it linear? You know, the whole aspect of how we look at time. There's a biological aspect. There's a thing, our bodies have a circadian rhythm, you know, where we respond to light. There's an aging process that is part of time. And, you know, some of us age faster than others. I actually came across a scientific research that said time is variable for aging people, and sometimes as you get older, actually time does slow down. Now, you can go read it for yourself. I'm not going to go into it because that's not what we're talking about. But then there's a scientific aspect where it becomes this dimension of the universe, one of the dimensions of the universe that we live in, and it's very complicated. So I won't get into that. But have you ever wondered what God's perspective is on time? Well, Moses says in Psalm 90, one of the first verses of the psalm that was read earlier, he says, 1,000 years is in your sight, 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. So remember that next time you pray, and you ask God, and he says, well, I'll get around to it in a minute. A minute turns out to be almost a year or so long. So God's perspective of time isn't like ours. The Bible has a couple words, and you've probably heard much of this before, maybe, but they're worth keeping in mind because it ties into what we're talking about today, where we talk about time. In the Greek, there's two words. There's the word chronos, where we all can figure out, we get our word for chronology, and it has to do with the measurement of time, the way we measure time and the way we think of time most often. But then there's the word kairos. And kairos has more the sense of, it's not a specific time that can be measurable. It's an opportune moment where God decides, that God acts, or something that happens. So Paul, for instance, to show you the difference, writes in Romans 5:6, at just the right time. That means at the opportune time. He's using the word kairos there. When we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. And then in Galatians, he says, when the time had come. In other words, in the time and the period of his human history had fully come, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under law, to redeem those under law, that we might have the full rights of sons. When Jesus came, it was the opportune time. But when he broke into history, it was a chronos time, it was a calendar time. And we need to keep that in mind, by the way, when we read Scripture, that Jesus was a first century Jew who lived in his own time. And we need to understand his culture, to understand even the stories that he told. When we read things back through our 21st century eyes, when we read Paul's letters, when we read whatever the Gospels, we run the risk of misinterpreting, misunderstanding, and misapplying Scripture because our perception of what takes place is from a different culture and a different time. God is not limited by time, but he chooses to work within time to deal with us as well. Well, the sermon series that we've been in, we started talking about how to deal with those things, that nagging sense that something is not quite right in our lives. You know, sometimes in the quieter moments of the day, you've had a busy day and you get to the end of the day when things have slowed down a little bit. Maybe it's as you prepare to go to bed at night or lie in bed before you go to sleep. And in those moments, sometimes we have this nagging feeling that something is not quite right in our lives, but we're not sure quite what. So we've been looking through the series of what those might be, so that we can take some time to reboot, to do a restart in your life here at the beginning of a year. We looked at how those things may come. We begin by pointing out that God may be stirring you a new vision for your life, that everything has been going along really good right now, but He's creating in you what I would call a holy disturbance, a holy restlessness, to say, disturb your comfort zone, so you would consider and say, and come to Him and say, so this is what I've been following. This has been the vision that I've been following up to now. What is your vision for the rest of my life or for the year that comes? So you might be stirring that kind of thing. Or perhaps you realize that your vision has become a bit fuzzy, a little bit out of focus, and He wants to help you bring it back in. We also looked at how easily we can get off course. And it can be start out by just being slightly off course, but if you don't do a little bit of course correction over a longer period of time, you get way off course. So we looked at these things, and eventually we can get off course. Of course, we wonder how on earth we got to where we ended up. But last week we looked at a process of discovering the greater purpose for your life. Do you know what it is? Did you remember to take some time this week to spend thinking about that, reflecting on that? Do you even have a sense of that you might have a purpose, one that you've intentionally thought through and are pursuing right now? And maybe even more so, if you do have that sense of purpose, is it in keeping with God's purpose for your life? Who He made you to be and what He's calling you to do. We looked at 4 questions that you need to answer. Who am I? What is your personality? What are your gifts and abilities? What do I care about most? What are my priorities and values in life that I've developed so far? What have I experienced in life? And particularly those painful experiences that sometimes we try to shove aside and try not to deal with. And then looking at it saying, what is a particular need in the world that God might be stirring in my heart and calling me to do something about? When these all come together, at where they converge together, you can discover your life purpose. A number of years ago, we had in our church a lady who she'd been a missionary for many years in Cambodia. Had lost her husband when they were in their 50s, but she'd carried on and stayed there. She'd reached the ripe old age of 65, which is North American retirement age, at least for some, and decided to retire. And she said, well, I tried that for a year, and it just wasn't working for me. I understand that fully. So she decided to go back on her own back to Cambodia. Didn't know what she was going to do, but she just began volunteering in one of the hospitals there. They had AIDS was an epidemic at that time, and there was a whole generation of adults that were dying off because of AIDS. And the result, because of Cambodia did not have, I don't know what it has now, but it didn't have, at least at the time, a safety network or any kind of way of supporting elderly people. She realized that there were a lot of particular widows, elderly women, who didn't have any family, any children left, and didn't have a husband left to support them. So she began just opening what she called granny houses, and began a whole charitable organization that was dedicated to helping these women exist and survive, but not only survive, but thrive. She also began to get into the process of helping to get teenage girls off the streets. They were being lured into the big cities by the promise of making good money, and then they were being trafficked by some people without scruples. I went across town where she was staying with somebody to pick her up because she was coming to speak, and I can still picture her sitting in my car, and she turned to me and she says, Don, she says, everything that has taken place in my life, God has been preparing me for what I'm doing right now, for what He has for me to do right now. That's the concept that I want you to have in your mind as you pursue, as you try to discover God's purpose for your life. So regardless of what age you are, whatever has taken place, whatever your experience of that, whatever your cultural background, whatever your education, whatever your gifts and abilities, God is preparing you for the next stage of your life where he has something for you to be involved in that's part of establishing his kingdom here on earth. It's up to you to discover that. To discover God's purpose in life doesn't mean that you go off and be a missionary someplace, unless he calls you to do that. It doesn't mean that you become a pastor. God has a purpose for your life right where you are right now. And if you look back over your lifetime leading up to this point, you will discover, I promise you, if you take enough time to do that, to reflect on that, God will help you understand and discover what that purpose is. Some quotes from one of my favorite authors, Frederick Buechner. He says, the place God calls you to is a place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. And then he goes on to say, your vocation life, your calling in life, is where your greatest joy meets the world's greatest need. Well, as we have talked about this, and I wanted to review some of these things because they form the context for what we're going to be talking specifically today and the next couple of Sundays. Because having a clear sense of purpose along with a renewed vision for your life will go a long way to help you set the right course, as well as to determine the best way to use your time in that process. See, time is one of the great equalizers of life. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter what position you hold. It doesn't matter what you know or who you know, where you live or who you are related to, or even what you have done in your life up until this point. We all started this day with the day has the same amount of hours for you as it does for me, for anybody else. The day has 24 hours. And each one of those hours has 60 minutes, the same as it for anybody else. It doesn't have any more time just because you're wealthy or because you're well off or because you're famous. We all start out the day with the same amount of time. Life has a beginning and an end. And while we may be able to state the date of our birth, most of us are blissfully unaware of when the end will come. Although as we get older, we do each reach a point where we know we have more life behind us than we have in front of us. And that's where I'm at. And let me tell you, that when you get to that point, you begin to evaluate how you've lived up until that point. Where you maybe have wasted some time or a lot of life and you wish you would have done it better. But you become committed also to saying, whatever years I have left, I want to make them count. I want to make a difference someplace. I want this not to be just about me, but about leaving the world a better place than it was when I arrived here. So, how we make use of that time, whatever time you and I have left on this earth, that is important and it makes all the difference in a life well lived. So today, as we talk about how we manage the time of our life, I want to just talk about a few principles that are worth examining and taking some soul searching in. First one is just make time for what is most important. There's an exercise here in your notes, and I hope you picked some up on the way in. There's just 2 columns, and you don't have to do all 5, and don't do it now, but maybe at some time when you have a little bit of time. Look at an ordinary day that you live, just an ordinary day. What takes most of your time? And just, eliminate commute to work, because if you have a long commute, that's not what I'm talking about. Or the amount of time you spend in work or school, or the time you spend sleeping, although some of you probably need to factor that in. So make a list of where do you spend the most time, and be honest. I mean, if you spend 4 hours playing video games, put 4 hours playing video games. If you spend 3 hours in front of the television, put 3 hours down in front of the television. Be honest about where you spend most of your time, the things that occupy most of your time. Then the second column, just list out what you think are the 3 to 5 most important activities in your life. Like you think this is the most important thing I have. And then I want you to check and see how those two lists line up. Because sometimes we say something is important, but it's not where we invest our time. As I said before, and next week we're going to talk about money. Where you invest your time and where you put your money, spend your money, will speak volumes as to what is most important in your life. You can say anything you like, but show me your bank book, your bank statement, and show me your calendar. And I'll tell you what, I can tell you without even knowing you, what is of greatest value and significance to you. So, start out there. Paul says, when he prays for writing to the Philippians and he prays for them, he says, this is my prayer. So that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best. Now, we don't have a whole lot of trouble discerning between what is good and bad. Most often in the course of our lives, when we're doing something, we think, well, I shouldn't be doing this. We know that. It isn't a matter of discernment. It's just a matter of ignorance and stupidity, actually, that we keep on doing that. Let's just be honest about that, too. But it takes a little bit more thought is to discern what is good and what is best. Because, you see, good can be the enemy of what is best. Good can be the enemy of what is great. We often settle for, that's good enough. Have you not heard that? Have you not said that? That's good enough. And God asks for us to give him the best, to put our best foot forward. We don't have to be perfect at what we do. We don't have to be better than somebody else. But if it's worth doing, it's worth doing to the best of your ability. Distinguishing between what is simply good and what is best will make all the difference in how you live your life out. It applies to us as a church too, by the way. There are a lot of good things we can do, and I think there are a lot of good things that we do. But if we don't have a sense of purpose and mission and vision for who we are and God has called us to be, we can do a lot of good things and be very ineffective and efficient in being the church that God has called us to be. Our vision statement, our mission statement should be the determining and deciding factor on everything we do. But the same thing holds true for your personal life. And that's why we needed to talk about what your purpose is, what your vision is, what course you're going on. Because that should be the determining factor about how you spend your time, what you give yourself to. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have downtime. That's fine. But we can spend a lot of time, waste a lot of time that accomplishes nothing in terms of value for our life. So the first thing here is discern what is best and give yourself to that. Second thing I would say is build margin in your life. We live busy lives. We suffer from hurried sickness. You know, Dr. Svensson has written a book called Margin, and I recommend it to you for reading. I'm just going to read an excerpt from it. He says, marginless is being 30 minutes late to the doctor's office because you were 20 minutes late out of the bank, because you were 10 minutes late dropping the kids off at school, because the car ran out of gas 2 blocks from the gas station, you forgot your wallet. Margin, on the other hand, is having breath left at the top of the staircase, money left at the end of the month, and sanity left at the end of adolescence. Marginless is when you pack so much into your schedule that you don't have a hope of staying on time. In the course of my years as a pastor, I won't name them right now. There's specific people I can name that I can almost guarantee that we set a time to meet and they will always be 15 minutes late. Always. And there's always a reason for it. You know, this happened or that went. If you're chronically late for everything, church, work, school, it's because you're not allowing the margin that it takes to get there on time. You're living life without margin. Margin is that gap in space in our time that allows us to go about without being racing around and going at a breakneck pace, breaking the speed limit, hoping you don't get pulled over, hope you don't get into an accident. Margin means that you can drive sanely, come to someplace without being stressed out. We lived away for a good number of years and then we would come back to Vancouver, Metro Vancouver on our vacation. There is a spirit of stress in the city that is contagious. But you don't realize it because you live here all the time. It's the very air you breathe. But I realized as I drove around, and we were here on vacation, all of a sudden I found myself racing around like everybody else, and I'm thinking, this is nuts. I don't have to be anywhere. But watch people and see how it affects your own driving when everybody's doing 20K over the speed limit and crossing the creek side. After a while, you're just trying to keep up with them. Build margin in your life, but it takes mental and emotional discipline to build that margin in life. Margin in your life means that you don't miss those opportune moments that are presented in front of you to actually respond or be part of what God might be doing around you. Most often we are so busy, so rushed, that we don't take note of what's taking place around us. Take a page out of the life and ministry of Jesus. He's on his way through Jericho. He's on his way to Jerusalem. He knows it's his final trip to Jerusalem. I believe he's wanting to get to Bethany where, Lazarus and Martha and Mary lived because they were good friends and it was a safe place for him to kind of settle down and spend the night before he has to go into the big city. So he's going through Jericho. Luke tells us that he plans to pass through. He's passing through Jericho. But as he's passing through, he looks up and he sees this guy up in the tree. And it's Zacchaeus. And we all know the story of Zacchaeus. And what does he say to Zacchaeus? He says, "Come on down, Zacchaeus, because today I'm staying in your house." Total change in plans. He not only goes to eat a meal with Zacchaeus, he stays with him. And you got to wonder what his disciples are thinking, who this guy is a tax collector. He's a traitor in their books. But he had the time. He was willing to alter his schedule. Same thing when John tells us about his encounter with the Samaritan woman by a well. I believe that Jesus is so tired out, he's burnt out, that he sends his disciples in to get lunch, and he stays by the well because nobody goes to draw water at 12 noon. I've heard all the things that, he expected this and that's why he stayed. No. He was human just like you. He stayed there because he just didn't want to see one more person. Along comes this woman to draw water, and he strikes up a conversation with her. In the process, she becomes a believer. But not only that, she goes back into the village and tells everybody else, and they all come out. You know what happened then? That lunch break turned into a 3-day stay in the Samaritan village. Opportune moments present themselves every time, every day. I promise you, I guarantee you that every day you will have an opportune moment to be the presence of Jesus in somebody's life. It may not be a long conversation. It may be just a friendly hello. It may be even holding the door open and helping somebody with their packages. But I also guarantee that you don't even see those opportunities. They don't dawn on you that that's something you could be doing, because you have a focus. You got to get there. You're running 10 minutes late, and you got to get to the dentist. You're running 20 minutes late, and you got to get to pick up your kids at school before they, end up in the office and they call you. Margin is vital to living your life by God's purpose and his plan. Build margin to your life. This one follows on it, the third one, and that is to make the most of the opportunities that come up. Paul writes to Ephesians, he says, be careful then how you live. Literally, he's saying, watch your step. Now, we have a couple of dogs. My daughter also dog sits, so we sometimes have more than a couple of dogs. If anybody goes into our backyard, that's simply what we tell them. Watch your step. Because you might step into something you didn't really want to. Paul is saying something the same way here. He's saying, watch your step because the day, don't be unwise but wise because the days are evil. There's bad things happening all around you. If you don't watch your step, you're going to end up someplace where you don't want to be. But he says, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. And when he says making the most, you ever heard the expression, redeem the time? This is where it was coined from. Because literally Paul is saying, ransoming the time, redeeming the time. And the word for time there is kairos, redeeming the opportune moment. Be careful. Watch where you're going. Because the opportunity is there. And don't be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. Make the most of every opportunity that presents itself to you. The last one I want to talk to you is practicing genuine Sabbath. There are 10 commandments. And I would say probably most people are pretty careful not to steal, not to commit adultery, not to give false witness. We're pretty good on 9 of them. We seem to give ourselves a pass on the one that says keep the Sabbath. And when we do think we're keeping the Sabbath, with all due respect, I doubt whether we're keeping it the way it was intended to keep. See, I was brought up that you didn't do anything on Sunday, you went to church, and honestly, Sundays were drudgery for a kid growing up. If you can reflect back on that growing up in a home where you weren't allowed to go out and do a whole lot of stuff on Sunday, you just had to be quiet, it doesn't fly. Here's what keeping the Sabbath means. It's not just another day off. And honest confession as a pastor, pastors are some of the worst violators of this. Because if you just take one day off in a week, which most of us often do, it's impossible for it to be a Sabbath. Really, what you exchange is one set of business, one type of work for another kind of work. Because when you just take one day off, you still got, you got shopping to do, you got a car to look after, you got yard work to do, you got kids to take care of, you got all kinds of things to do that it really is not the restful day. You said, thank God it's Monday because I can go to work and get some rest? Or have you come back from a vacation and thought, I can go back to work now, I can get some rest? That is not Sabbath. That's not getting rest. That's not taking time off from life. So I've put this acronym just together because it helps me remember what genuine Sabbath rest is all about. And so I just want to go over it quickly with you and see if you can't remember it. The R for rest stands for release. Let go of your need to control everything. If you believe God's in control, let him be in control. You don't need to control everybody else in your life. You don't need to control everything that's happening in your life. Release. Let it go. Kick back. E is for enjoy. Take some time to enjoy your relationships. Whether it's with family, with friends, enjoy your relationship with God. Worship is about that. It's about enjoying that relationship with God. It's about refocusing. Stillness. And I suspect out of all these, this might be the hardest one for some of you to do. Shut the noise down in your life. That means turn the cell phone off. Unplug the computer. Unplug the TV. Shut the noise out of your life. See if you can go 24 hours without having to check your phone. Now, if you can't, you have an addiction. Because the definition of an addiction is a compulsive use or need for something that isn't necessarily necessary for the vital aspects of life. So I challenge you, shut it down at least for even half a day. And not overnight when you're sleeping, okay? Shut it down. Just put a block on it. Cut it out. Experience stillness. Find some time to just simply be quiet. The Bible tells us to be still, God says, and know that I am God. Stop striving. Let him be. Thankfulness. Take some time to be thankful, to express and experience gratitude for what you have and where you are and who's in your life as well. I want to close with this last one. And that is about making your life count. Moses in Psalm 90:12, and it was read for us, teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. What he's saying is, make your days count. He's not saying count your days, but make your days count. Make your life count for something. If you were to die today or tomorrow, how would you want to be remembered? Who would you want to show up at your funeral or your memorial service? What is it that you would hope they would say? At the end of your life, what will your life have mattered? Will it have counted for something? See, we get squeezed into the world's mold. And we conform to the pattern of this world. Where we chase after position, prestige, possessions. I've sat with people in hospice over the last years as a pastor. I've never heard one person say, I wish I'd made a little bit more money. I wish I'd done this a little bit better or done something else. To one, the one thing they want and wish they would have around them, and some of them, sadly, because of the way they live, don't, is relationships. It's people who've made a difference in their life and they've made a difference in their life. Whatever you're chasing today, pursuing today, is that what you want to be known for at the end of your life? It's how you use your time. Time is what our life is made up of. When we're a lot younger, we think we have lots of time. But I could dare say there are probably witnesses here who say they look back and they would say, where did the time go? Make your life count. Invest your time wisely. Know what God's purpose is for your life. And use that as a focus point for how you use your time. Father, you exist outside of time. Time is not a limitation to you, but it is for us. But you've placed us in this particular place at this particular time. May we discover what your calling on our individual personal lives is, as well as what you've called us and who you've called us to be as a church. That we would fulfill your purpose. And at the end of our lives, it could be said of us the same thing that Stephen said about David, who came to the end of his life, had accomplished his purpose and for his generation, and then was laid to rest. May we give ourselves and reflect on how we're using our time, that we would use it better in a more wise way, in such a way that we would be able to hear from you. Well done, good and faithful servant.